She didn't scream. She didn't call for help. She folded a napkin into a triangle, tucked the corner, and slid it across a table like she was clearing dishes. That single move, quiet as a whisper, precise as a blade, would save a child's life before midnight. If you've ever trusted your gut when every logical voice told you to stay quiet, this story is for you. Subscribe to this channel, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me because what happens next inside the Copper Kettle Diner will shake you to your core. The Friday night rush at the Copper Kettle Diner had the rhythm Emily Carter had memorized over 11 years behind that counter. Coffee, refill, smile, check. The bell above the door rang about 40 times between 5 and 9 on a normal Friday. She barely heard it anymore. It was background noise like the hiss of the pie warmer or the shuffle of boots on linoleum, or Dale Richter at table 6, complaining that his meatloaf was always too dry every single week, like clockwork. Emily knew this diner the way a sailor knows the sea. Every creak of the floorboards, every draft that came through the west window when the wind picked up off the mountain. She knew which booths wobbled, which lights flickered when the walk-in refrigerator kicked on, which regulars needed 3 sugars without being asked. She knew people. That was her gift or her curse, depending on the night. She had a theory, a real one. Not the kind you read in psychology textbooks, but the kind you develop by serving thousands of strangers over more than a decade. She believed that when people sat down at a table, they couldn't fully hide who they were. Not after the first 5 minutes. Hunger dropped the mask a little. Fatigue dropped it more. And if you were patient, if you just watched without staring, listened without leaning in, they'd show you everything. It was 8:47 p.m. when the bell rang for the 43rd time that evening. She didn't look up right away. She was pouring a fresh coffee for Martha Brayland, who was on her 2nd slice of apple pie and her 3rd story about her daughter's new house in Billings. Emily made the right sounds. Oh, really? And that sounds beautiful. While her eyes drifted toward the door. 2 men, a girl between them. She registered them in layers the way she always did. First layer physical. The men were large, not gym large, work large. The kind of muscle that comes from years of doing things that require force. One was maybe 40 short, dark hair wearing a canvas jacket despite the warmth inside. The other was younger mid-30s with a jaw that looked like it had been set wrong after being broken. Both of them moved with their shoulders forward, not aggressive, not exactly. Just ready, like they were always ready. 2nd layer configuration. The girl walked between them, not beside them, between them. One man slightly ahead, one slightly behind, with her in the middle like the filling of something. She was maybe 12, maybe 13. Hard to tell. She was slight with light brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail that had slipped to one side. She wore a hoodie that was too big men's size, the kind you grab because it's available, not because it fits. Her eyes were on the floor. 3rd layer, and this was the one that woke something up in Emily's chest, something old and sharp, was what the girl was not doing. She was not fidgeting. She was not looking around the way kids do in restaurants, clocking the dessert display, checking to see if there was anything interesting on TV. She was not asking questions. She was not pulling at the sleeve of one of the men to ask if she could have a milkshake. She was not doing any of the 10,000 small, ordinary things that children do in public. She was still, not calm still, not tired still, controlled still, the kind of still that gets learned. Emily's hand paused for exactly half a second on Martha's coffee mug. Then she steadied herself and smiled at Martha as she finished the pour. "You'll have to send me a photo when they finish the kitchen," she said, and her voice came out completely normal because that was something else 11 years had taught her, how to keep your voice normal when your blood was starting to move faster. "Table's yours, hun," she called toward the host stand where Denny, 17 years old and on his 2nd month of work, was looking at his phone. He startled and grabbed 3 menus without looking up. "I'll take them," Emily said. She intercepted him so smoothly he probably thought it was just her being helpful, which she was. She was being very helpful. She picked up the menus and walked toward them. Boing. Up close it was worse. The older man canvas jacket was already directing the girl into the booth. Not with a hand on her shoulder, not with a word. He simply angled his body and she moved into the seat the way water moves into the shape of whatever holds it. No resistance, no decision. He sat across from her. The younger man, broken jaw, slid in beside her, trapping her against the window. Window seat, one man in front, one man beside. Zero exit. Emily set the menus down. "Evening, folks," she said. "Get you started with some drinks." Broken jaw looked up first. His eyes did something, a quick scan top to bottom, the way someone checks a perimeter. He decided she wasn't a threat before she finished her sentence. "Coffee," he said. "Black." Canvas Jacket was already reading the menu. "Same," he said without looking up. Emily turned to the girl. "And for you, sweetheart, we've got hot chocolate tonight, real good on a cold evening. Or lemonade if you'd rather, something cold." The girl's eyes moved, just barely. They shifted up from the table to somewhere around Emily's collarbone, then dropped again. Her lips pressed together. "She'll have water," Canvas Jacket said, still without looking up. Emily kept her smile exactly where it was. "Sure thing. Water it is." She looked at the girl for one extra beat, just one, and the girl's chin dipped almost imperceptibly. Not a nod, more like a flinch inward. Emily walked back to the counter. She stood at the coffee station for exactly 12 seconds. She counted them. Not because she was stalling, because she needed to think, and 12 seconds was enough to run the first calculation. What she had seen could be explained away. Men who ordered for their companion weren't automatically criminal. Children who were quiet weren't automatically in danger. The seating arrangement that had a dozen innocent explanations. A tired kid, an uncle and a family friend taking a niece on a road trip. A shy girl who just didn't like strangers. Emily had been wrong before. Once years ago, she'd nearly called the police on a man and a teenage girl who turned out to be a father and daughter on their way home from a hospital visit. The girl had been sedated from a procedure. Emily had felt sick about it for weeks. She was not going to let fear make her reckless. But she was also not going to let caution make her blind. She poured 2 coffees and a water, set them on a tray, and walked back to the booth. "Sam, ready to order?" she asked, setting the drinks down. Canvas Jacket had closed his menu. "Burger, medium, no tomato." Broken jaw. "Same, well done." Emily turned to the girl again. "How about you, sweetheart?" "The mac and cheese is real popular. Grilled cheese if you want something simple." The girl's hand was resting on the table. Emily watched the fingers press slightly against the laminate surface, as if she was trying to anchor herself to something solid. "She's not hungry," Canvas Jacket said. Emily looked at the girl. "You sure no pressure? We can just do a side of fries, something small." The girl's mouth opened, just barely, and Emily heard it or felt it more accurately, the beginning of a word forming. Then Broken Jaw shifted his weight, just slightly. His knee must have pressed against hers under the table because the girl's mouth closed again, like a door quietly shut. "She said she's fine," Canvas Jacket said. His tone hadn't changed. He wasn't aggressive, he wasn't loud. He was the kind of steady that had been practiced, the kind that said very clearly that there was nothing to argue with, because arguing wasn't going to happen. "Of course," Emily said. She collected the extra menu. "I'll get those burgers right in for you." She walked to the kitchen window, clipped the ticket, and called out, "2 burgers, table 9, 1 medium no tomato, 1 well done." Then she leaned against the counter and looked at her hands. They weren't shaking. That surprised her. Her heart was doing something fast and rhythmic behind her sternum, but her hands were completely still. She thought, not for the first time, that maybe all those years of holding herself together in the face of other people's chaos had done something permanent to her nervous system. The girl was not okay. She knew it now with the kind of certainty that didn't ask for logic. The word trafficking hadn't fully formed in her mind yet, not consciously, not with that weight, but the shape of it was there. The controlled stillness, the ordering for her, the knee under the table, the hoodie that wasn't hers, the eyes that went up, and then down, never quite making contact, never quite trusting. Emily had 40 minutes, maybe less, before those burgers were gone, and those men were going to stand up, boxing that girl, and walk out the door. She looked at the clock, 8:54 p.m. She thought about this police. The nearest station was in Hargrove. On a good night, clear roads, no incidents elsewhere. 38 minutes. On a Friday night, add 10. She'd made this calculation before, not for this reason, but she'd made it. The Copper Kettle sat in a stretch of highway that the county covered on a shoestring and a prayer. She couldn't wait for the police. "Hey, Em." Bobby, the short order cook, leaned through the window. You good? You look like you're doing math. I'm always doing math, Bobby, she said. Those burgers? How long? 14, 15 minutes for the well done. Make it 13, she said. He gave her a look. You want me to rush a well done? I want you to make it 13 minutes, Bobby. He studied her face. Bobby had worked with her for 6 years. He was not a perceptive man. In most respects, he still called the manager sport unironically, but he knew Emily's face. He nodded slowly. 13 minutes. She turned back to the dining room. At table 9, Canvas Jacket was on his phone. Broken Jaw was looking out the window. The girl was looking at her water glass. She hadn't touched it. Emily began running through the options the way she always ran through options when a situation was beyond the normal channels. This was something Ray Callahan had taught her, not directly, not in a classroom, but through 6 years of knowing him. Ray had a saying, when the road closes, you don't stand there, you find the edge. Ray Callahan. The thought of him arrived like a key turning in a lock. She hadn't seen him in 11 days. He'd been in for his usual Thursday morning huffing. No, before that, 2 cups black, the second always with one of the cherry turnovers. She set aside for him because he'd never once asked, but always looked at the display like he was hoping. They'd talked about the weather, about the new highway project, about a motorcycle rally somewhere south that he was half considering attending. Normal conversation, the kind 2 people have when they've known each other long enough to not need to prove anything. Ray Callahan was the president of the Hells Angels charter based 40 minutes north of Hargrove. Emily had known this for years in the matter-of-fact way you know things about people who are simply part of your landscape. He wasn't a caricature. He wasn't what people assumed when they heard the words. He was a man who drank his coffee black, who tipped better than anyone else who came through that door, who had once quietly and without any announcement paid 2 months of back rent for Denny's family when his father had lost his job. She'd only found out by accident. She'd learned other things about Ray over the years, things said between the lines, things implied in stories he'd never finished telling. She knew he had a past with law enforcement, not as an ally, not always as an enemy, but as someone who existed in the space between, who understood how things actually worked when the system was too slow or too far away. And she knew because they had built it together carefully, one conversation at a time over years, about the Napkin code. It had started as a joke, or something close to a joke. It was 4 years ago, maybe 4.5. A man had come in drunk and escalating with his girlfriend, and Emily had been alone on the floor. Denny wasn't hired yet, the other waitress had gone home sick, and the situation had reached the edge of something frightening before it resolved on its own. Ray had been there that night at the counter, and afterward, when the man had finally left and Emily had allowed herself one full breath, Ray had said quietly, "You should have a way to signal, in case it ever gets to a point where you can't use words." She'd looked at him. "A napkin," he'd said. "Everyone handles napkins. It's invisible." They developed it over the following months, not as anything formal, nothing written down, nothing official, just a thing they both knew. Triangle fold corner tucked under. It meant I need help. Right now, not in a minute. Now. She had used it exactly 0 times in 4 years. She had never believed she would use it. Now she stood at the counter and looked at the stack of white paper napkins in the dispenser beside the coffee station, and she made the decision so fast that her body had already started moving before her conscious mind fully caught up. She pulled a napkin free. Her hands moved without hesitation, triangle fold the corner, tucked under, clean and deliberate. She'd practiced it without knowing she was practicing all those times she'd handled napkins at the counter over the years, all those times her fingers had made the shape without meaning to, the way your body rehearses the things it needs to be ready for. She set it on the edge of the tray. She brought 2 coffee refills to the table by the window. Not table 9, not yet. She needed a position. She went to table 12 first, an older couple who'd been nursing their pie for 40 minutes and refilled their coffees and chatted for 30 seconds about nothing at all. And while she did it, she was watching the parking lot through the window. Ray's truck wasn't there. He came in most Thursdays, sometimes Fridays, sometimes on nights when there was no reason, just because the Copper Kettle was the kind of place that a person returned to without needing a reason. She had no way of knowing if he'd come tonight. She had no way of reaching him except this. She looked at the napkin on her tray. She thought about this girl at table 9 with her water glass she hadn't touched, and her too big hoodie, and her fingers pressed flat against the laminate like she was trying to hold on. Emily carried the tray to the counter near the register, the spot closest to the door, the spot where anyone coming in would pass within arm's reach, and she set the folded napkin down at the corner of the counter, right where Ray Callahan always stopped to say hello before sitting down. Oh, the clock read 9:02. The burgers were still 11 minutes away. Emily went back to the floor. She moved between tables with the same rhythm as always, the same practiced ease, refilling, checking, collecting. She asked Dale Richter if he wanted the usual, and he said yes, and complained that the meatloaf was dry again, and she said she'd let the kitchen know, and she wouldn't because she never did, because the meatloaf was never actually dry and Dale just needed something to say. At table 9, both men were eating. The burgers had come out in 12 minutes. Bobby had actually pulled it off. Neither man looked up when she set the plates down. The girl sat with nothing in front of her. Her water was still full. Her hands were in her lap now. "Can I get you folks anything else?" Emily asked. "We're good," Canvas Jacket said. She looked at the girl one more time. The girl's eyes came up. They were brown and very tired, and in them Emily saw something she recognized, not from this diner, not from these specific tables, but from years of reading people. It was the look of someone who had been waiting for so long to be seen that they'd almost stopped believing it was possible. Emily held that look for 2 full seconds. Then she said softly enough that only the girl could hear it, "I see you." The girl's breath caught, just barely. Emily collected the empty coffee cups and walked back to the counter. The folded napkin was still there at the corner, undisturbed. She looked at the clock. 9:14 p.m. The door hadn't opened. She let out a slow, measured breath and kept moving, kept pouring, kept smiling, kept the whole architecture of an ordinary Friday night shift, standing upright by sheer force of will, while inside in the place where her real thoughts lived, she was doing the only thing left to do. She was waiting. And she was praying that 40 minutes north of Hargrove, a man who drank his coffee black was feeling something he couldn't explain, the pull of a place, the sense of unfinished business, the particular gravity of a night that had more weight than it looked. She was praying that Ray Callahan was getting on his bike. I see you." 2 words. That was all she had given the girl. But Emily Carter had been in this business long enough to know that sometimes 2 words said at exactly the right second by exactly the right person were the difference between a child who survived and a child who didn't. She picked up the coffee pot. She kept moving, because that was the only thing she could do until the napkin found its way to the right pair of hands. Keep the night fracturing, keep the men comfortable, keep the girl visible, keep herself from doing anything that would make those 2 large men with their forward set shoulders stand up early and walk out with everything they'd brought in. The hands of the clock moved. The napkin waited. And somewhere outside beneath Montana's cold and indifferent sky, the night was still deciding what kind of night it was going to be. The clock on the wall behind the counter read 9:17 p.m. Emily had refilled every coffee cup on the floor twice. She'd checked on Dale Richter's meatloaf complaint with the theatrical concern of someone who had absolutely nothing else on her mind. She'd laughed at a joke Bobby made through the kitchen window. She couldn't even remember what the joke was afterward, just that she'd laughed because laughing was normal, and normal was the armor she was wearing tonight. At table 9, Canvas Jacket had finished his burger. He'd eaten it the way men eat when eating is just fuel, methodically without pleasure, cleaning the plate because waste is inefficiency. Broken Jaw was slower picking at his fries now, occasionally glancing toward the door in a way that looked casual but wasn't. Emily had clocked that glance 7 times in 20 minutes. He was checking the lot. He was watching the entrance. He wasn't relaxed. He was stationed. The girl hadn't eaten anything. Her water glass was still full. She sat with her back against the window and her knees pressed together and her hands somewhere under the table, and she stared at a point on the tabletop about 6 inches in front of her, like she was trying to disappear into the geometry of the laminate. Emily had seen people try to disappear before, a woman whose husband yelled too loud, a teenager whose parents argued across the table like he wasn't there. But this was different. This wasn't someone trying to escape a moment. This was someone who had learned systematically and over time to take up as little space as possible, to need nothing, to want nothing, to be nothing that anyone would have to respond to. That kind of stillness wasn't a personality trait. It was a survival skill. Emily walked past table 9 on her way to the register and let her eyes drop to the girl's hands, which were now visible on the edge of the table. The knuckles were white, not from cold, from pressure, from gripping something under the table she couldn't see, or from gripping nothing at all, which was somehow worse. She kept walking. She didn't stop. Stopping would break the rhythm of the night, and she needed that rhythm intact. At the register, she made change for the Braylons, who were finally leaving after their second slice of pie, and said goodbye with her full smile, the one she meant, because Martha Breland was a genuinely good woman, and Emily was grateful in this moment for the simple fact that Martha was going home to her warm house and her photographs of her daughter's new kitchen and her completely ordinary Friday night. Emily was grateful that for Martha tonight was just a night. Then she looked at the corner of the counter. The napkin was still there, untouched. She turned back to the floor. Unpatient. The problem Emily understood now was time. Not the abstract concept of it, the very specific, very measurable quantity of it that remained before those two men decided they were done and stood up from that booth. Canvas Jacket had pushed his plate to the edge of the table. That was the signal. Men like him, men who moved through the world with that particular economy of motion, didn't linger. They ate, they waited for whatever they were waiting for, and they left. She figured she had maybe 15 minutes before he made the decision to go, and once he stood up, the whole structure she'd been quietly maintaining collapsed. She needed to slow it down. She walked to their table with the coffee pot, even though she'd refilled Canvas Jacket's cup 10 minutes ago. Top you off, she asked, already tilting the pot toward his cup in the way that made it awkward to say no. He looked at the pot, then at her. Sure, he said, and there was something in the word, a flatness, a small assessment, that told her he was not a man who missed much. You folks passing through, she asked. Easy, conversational. The kind of question every waitress asked everywhere because it was the harmless currency of small talk. Yeah, Canvas Jacket said. Headed south or north? South. Long drive tonight. He looked at her then, not aggressively calculatingly. He was measuring the question against some internal template for threat. She could feel it happening. She kept her face at the exact temperature of friendly, not warm, not curious, just the ambient pleasantness of someone doing her job on a Friday night. Long enough, he said. She nodded and topped off Broken Jaw's cup without asking. Will you take your time, she said. No rush at all. She walked away. Her heart was going like a second hand stuck on fast forward, but her walk was exactly as unhurried as it always was. 9:26 p.m. Bobby leaned through the kitchen window. You want me to hold the next ticket? It's quiet. No, Emily said. Keep it normal back there. He looked at her again with that 6-year look. Emily, I'm fine, Bobby. You keep looking at table 9. Table 9 has a kid who hasn't eaten anything and it bothers me. Bobby was quiet for a moment. Those guys give you a weird feeling. Most guys give me a weird feeling, Bobby. It's called experience. He didn't laugh. You want me to come out front for a bit, pretend I'm restocking or something? She thought about it, genuinely thought about it. Bobby was 6'2" and had hands like a pair of catcher's mitts, and she did not want him anywhere near table 9. Because if anything changed in that booth, if those men felt the slightest shift in the atmosphere, sensed any form of surveillance, any tightening of the room, they would be up and moving before anyone could do a thing. And when men like that moved fast, children got hurt. Stay back there, she said. Please. Okay, he said, just okay, no argument. That was Bobby at his best. She pulled out her order pad and wrote nothing on it, just stood at the counter, pretending to write, eyes up watching. Canvas Jacket had his phone out again. He was reading something. His expression didn't change, and it almost never did, but his thumb stopped, moving for a moment on the screen, and then he put the phone face down on the table. He said something to Broken Jaw low and quick, and Broken Jaw nodded once sharply. Something had changed. Emily didn't know what. She hadn't heard the words, couldn't read, the phone had no access to whatever information had just passed between them. But she knew the way she knew things about people from watching them across dining rooms for 11 years, that the timeline had just compressed. They were moving sooner than she'd thought. She looked at the clock, 9:28. She looked at the corner of the counter. The napkin was still there. She made a decision. Bye-bye. She walked to the back hallway past the restrooms to the small closet where they kept the extra supplies. She pulled out her cell phone, no service, not unusual for this part of the county. She'd known this, she'd been carrying this dead weight of a device all evening, and looked at it anyway in case something miraculous had occurred in the last hour. 1 bar. She dialed the Hargrove PD non-emergency line. 3 rings, a hold tone. She counted to 15 before someone picked up. Hargrove Police, this is Officer Garfield. This is Emily Carter at the Copper Kettle Diner on Route 9. I have a situation I need to report. She kept her voice to barely above a whisper, controlled and clear. What kind of situation, ma'am? I have a young girl in my diner with 2 adult males who I believe may be in the process of transporting her against her will. She has not spoken, has not eaten, and appears to be under duress. A pause, the sound of something being shuffled. Have you seen any weapons, ma'am? No. Any verbal threats? No. And you say you believe... I know what I'm looking at, Emily said quietly, and there was something in her voice that stopped him. I have been watching people in this diner for 11 years, and I know what fear looks like on a child's face. I need someone here. Another pause. I can have a unit there in approximately 40 minutes, maybe 35 if... They'll be gone in 15, Emily said. Maybe less. Silence on the line. I'll expedite it as much as I can, ma'am. Stay on the ball. She hung up. 40 minutes. She'd known it would be 40 minutes. She'd known this was how this call would go. She stood in the hallway with the phone in her hand, and she breathed in once, all the way down and out again, all the way out. Then she put the phone in her apron pocket and walked back onto the floor. And at table 9, Canvas Jacket had stacked the receipts and put his wallet on the table. He was preparing to pay. Emily walked to the table without being called. How are we doing? She asked, and she set a slice of cherry pie on the table, not asked for, not ordered, just placed there with a fork. She looked at it as if she'd made a small mistake. Oh, sorry, that was for the table behind you. Let me just take that back and... Leave it, Canvas Jacket said, and his eyes flicked to the pie and then to her, and there was nothing warm in them, but there was appetite, and appetite was time. She left the pie. She had bought herself maybe 6 minutes. She went to the counter, and she felt the weight of what she was up against with a clarity that was almost physical, like standing in a current and feeling how strong it actually was. 38 minutes away, a police car that might or might not be moving. 15 minutes away, at most 2 men and a girl walking out a door she had no legal authority to block. And between those 2 timelines, Emily Carter, a waitress with a coffee pot and an apron, and 11 years of reading people, holding an entire situation together with table conversation and cherry pie. She looked at the napkin. She thought about Ray Callahan. She thought about his voice, low and even, the voice of someone who didn't need volume because volume was for people who weren't sure they'd be heard. She thought about what he'd said 4 years ago. When the road closes, you don't stand there. You find the edge. She had placed the napkin. That was all she could do with it. She could not summon him. She could not call him. She didn't have a number that worked out here. And even if she did, the 1 bar on her phone was more wish than reality. She had done the one thing available to her, and now she was on the other side of it, holding the line with everything she had. But something was shifting inside her, a different kind of calculation. Less about time, more about what she could actually control. She couldn't control whether Ray came. She could control the next 4 minutes. She went back to the table with the bill, even though Canvas Jacket hadn't asked for it. Whenever you're ready, she said, setting it face down the way she always did. No rush at all, honestly, take your time with that pie. She smiled at the pie like it was an old friend. Canvas Jacket looked at her for a long moment. Not threateningly, evaluatively. She had the distinct sensation of being a door he was trying to determine whether it was locked. You always this friendly, he asked. It's a Friday, Emily said. Friday brings out the best in me. He looked away, took a bite of the pie, set his fork down and pulled out his wallet. Emily turned to go, hey, broken jaw, speaking for the 2nd time all night. She turned back. He was looking at the girl. Say thank you, he said, not asking, instructing. The girl's head came up. Her eyes found Emily's face, really found it, this time not the collarbone, not the apron, but Emily's actual eyes, and Emily looked back. She held it. She did not look away. Thank you, the girl said. Her voice was barely anything, thin as paper, but it was there. You're so welcome, honey, Emily said, and she meant it with every single thing she had. She went back to the counter and made herself breathe normally. The girl had spoken. That mattered not just emotionally, not just as confirmation of what Emily already knew, but because in that half second of eye contact, Emily had seen something else, something she hadn't caught before. Around the girl's left wrist, barely visible below the oversized hoodie sleeve that had slipped slightly when she turned to speak, a mark. Dark, linear, the kind that doesn't come from falling. Emily gripped the edge of the counter. She had been 90% certain before. She was 100% certain now. Canvas jacket left cash on the table. Exact change, no tip. The bill smoothed flat like a period at the end of a sentence. He was getting up, 9:41 p.m. Emily moved. Not running, never running. Running would snap the whole thing open like a wire pulled too tight, but moving with purpose, angling herself between the register and the door in the way that required her to pass the front counter, to sweep her hand across the corner of the counter, as if straightening things, as if doing the 10,000 small maintenance tasks that kept a diner functioning. Her fingers closed around the folded napkin. She kept walking. She reached the small stand near the door, the one with the toothpicks and the mints, and she set the napkin there. At eye level, right where anyone coming through the door would see it before they saw anything else. She'd moved the signal, closer to the entrance, more visible. It was the only escalation available to her. Broken Jaw was standing now. He put his hand not gently, not roughly, just firmly, with the casual authority of someone accustomed to not being questioned, on the girl's shoulder. The girl stood. Emily was at the register when they approached. Canvas jacket pushed the cash across the counter. She counted it without hurrying, made change, handed it back with a smile. "You drive safe now," she said. "Roads get slick out by the pass after 9. "We know the roads," Canvas jacket said. "I'm sure you do," Emily said pleasantly. They turned toward the door. The girl was between them. They were 4 steps from the exit. Emily's mind went absolutely still in the way it had never quite gone still before. Not quiet, not calm, but crystalline. She was watching the door. She was watching the girl's feet, small feet in sneakers that were the wrong size, a half size too big, the kind of shoes that don't belong to you, moving toward the exit. She was watching the clock. She was watching the napkin on the stand by the door. 3 steps. She had nothing left. 2 steps. She had run every option. The police were 30 minutes out. Bobby was in the back. The dining room had 2 other tables, Dale Richter and an older man she didn't know, and nothing that constituted help. 1 step. The bell above the door began to move, and the door opened from the outside. The sound hit the room before anything else did. Not the bell, not a voice, not footsteps. The sound of Harley engines, multiple, pulling into the lot with the low rolling thunder of machines that were not rushing and did not need to. Canvas jacket stopped. Broken Jaw stopped. The girl stopped. Emily stopped breathing. Through the window she saw them, headlights one after another, swinging into the parking lot in a loose, unhurried formation. Not racing, not aggressive, just arriving the way a tide arrives, without asking permission and without needing to announce itself. And then the door opened all the way. Ray Callahan stepped through it. He wasn't tall in the way that demanded attention. He was tall in the way that occupied space solidly, completely, without apology. His jacket was worn leather that had seen weather and years and things Emily could only guess at. His eyes moved across the room in one single sweep, the kind of sweep that missed nothing. And they found the napkin on the stand beside him before they found anything else. He picked it up. He looked at it. His eyes came up and found Emily across the room. She didn't nod. She didn't gesture. She didn't need to. Because Ray Callahan had unfolded the napkin, seen the triangle fold, felt the tucked corner, and in the space of 1 second, one single silent second, he understood everything. He set the napkin back down. He walked in. Ray Callahan did not look like a man who had just ridden 40 minutes in the dark. He looked like a man who had been awake for this exact moment and had simply been waiting for it to arrive. He didn't rush. That was the first thing Canvas Jacket registered, and Emily could see it register, the slight recalibration behind his eyes, the almost imperceptible reset of his posture. Men like Canvas Jacket understood threat through speed and aggression. What they didn't know how to process immediately was stillness combined with absolute certainty. Ray moved through the door and across the floor the way weather moves, not fast, not slow, but with the kind of inevitability that made the question of stopping it feel irrelevant. He pulled out the stool at the counter. He sat down. Emily was already moving toward him with the coffee pot because that was what she did when Ray came in, and tonight that routine was the most important performance of her life. She set a mug down, filled it. Her hand was steady. She was proud of that later, that her hand was completely steady. "Evening," Ray said. To her, normal as rainfall. "Evening," she said back. "Cherry turnover's gone, I'm afraid." "That's all right." He wrapped both hands around the mug. He didn't look at table 9. He didn't need to. His peripheral vision had already done the work. She could tell by the quality of his stillness, which was different now from what it had been at the door. Tighter, more deliberate. Canvas jacket hadn't moved. He and Broken Jaw were still standing 3 feet from the exit with the girl between them, and the calculus of their situation had shifted in a way they could feel but not yet fully name. Outside, those engines had gone quiet one by one. And that silence, the specific silence of multiple bikes shutting down simultaneously, had its own weight. Canvas jacket looked at Broken Jaw. Broken Jaw looked at the window. Emily watched all of it from behind the counter while she pretended to check the pie display. Ray took a sip of coffee, set the mug down, and then without turning his head, without raising his voice, he said, "You boys want to sit back down." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a threat. It was delivered with the flat, calm authority of a man stating something he already knew to be true, the way you'd tell someone the floor is wet just so they knew. Canvas jacket's jaw tightened. "We were just leaving." "I know," Ray said. He turned on the stool, then unhurried and looked at them directly for the first time. "Sit back down?" The room changed. Emily felt it the way you feel pressure change before a storm in your ears, in your chest, in the particular quality of the air. Dale Richter at his corner table had gone very still over his coffee. The other customer, the older man Emily didn't know, was looking at his plate with the focused attention of someone who had decided this was an excellent moment to be invisible. Canvas jacket made his calculation visibly. She could see it happening in the set of his shoulders, in the way his weight shifted slightly forward and then didn't commit. He was measuring Ray, measuring the parking lot outside, measuring the distance to the door against whatever he was seeing in Ray Callahan's face. And whatever he found in that face made him pull out the booth and sit back down. Broken Jaw followed. The girl sat between them again, and now her stillness had a different quality, not the practiced disappearance of before, but something wound tighter, like a person bracing. Ray picked up his coffee and carried it to table 9. He set it down across from Canvas jacket and pulled out the chair and sat down like he'd been invited. Like this was always how the night was going to go. Emily gripped the counter behind her. She couldn't hear everything from where she stood. Ray's voice was low, deliberately low, and Canvas jacket's responses were lower still, the conversation happening in the register where you could see mouths moving but words dissolved before they crossed the room. She caught fragments. She wasn't meant to catch more than that. What she could read was bodies. Canvas jacket had started with his arms crossed, closed defended, and within 90 seconds he'd uncrossed them and put both hands flat on the table. Not relaxed, the opposite. The posture of someone who had just realized the conversation they thought they were in was not the conversation actually happening. Broken Jaw was very still in the particular way of someone waiting to be told what to do. Ray never raised his voice. She could see that clearly. He spoke and Canvas jacket listened, and once Canvas jacket started to say something with volume leaning forward, and Ray said something very short and very quiet, and Canvas jacket sat back and went pale. Went pale. Emily had served this counter for 11 years. She had seen anger, grief, humiliation, every shade of human experience across these tables. She had never once seen a man the size and nature of Canvas jacket go pale from 3 words delivered quietly over a cup of coffee. She needed to keep moving. Standing still behind the counter was its own signal, its own anomaly, and she couldn't afford anomalies. She went to Dale Richter's table and asked if he wanted anything else, and he said no in a voice that was approximately 1 octave higher than normal, and she thanked him and went to the other customer, who also declined anything with the energy of a man who was calculating his exit strategy. When she came back past the counter, she looked at Bobby through the kitchen window. He was standing at the pass-through with a dish towel in his hands that he wasn't using, watching table 9. "Bobby," she said quietly, "go check your inventory." "My inventory is fine." "Bobby," he looked at her, "there are guys outside M. A lot of guys." "I know." "Are we, is this—" "Go check your inventory," she said. "Everything is under control." She said it with enough conviction that he went because the alternative Bobby coming out front with his catcher's mitt irons and his protective instincts was a variable she could not manage right now. She needed the room exactly as it was. She needed Ray to have the space to do whatever Ray was doing, and she needed to keep the architecture of the ordinary intact for just a little longer. She went back to the counter, she picked up a cloth, and started wiping it down. She watched table 9. Isha's fine. 10 minutes had passed since Ray sat down. In those 10 minutes, something fundamental had reorganized itself in the booth. Canvas Jacket was no longer the man who had walked in with forwarded set shoulders and the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to controlling every room he entered. He was still large. He was still physically capable of anything that physical capability could provide. But Ray had taken something from him, not with a weapon, not with volume, with information. Emily could tell because of how Canvas Jacket kept very carefully not looking at the door. When a man is frightened of what's outside, he stops looking at it. He pretends it isn't there. It's the same impulse that makes children close their eyes against what scares them. Canvas Jacket was pretending the parking lot wasn't full of Ray Callahan's people. Broken Jaw had his hands under the table. Emily watched that. She watched it carefully. But Ray was watching it too, she realized, because at one point Ray said something and tilted his chin very slightly downward, and Broken Jaw brought both hands up and set them on the table without being directly told. Whatever Ray had said, it had been enough. The girl was watching Ray now. Not the table, not her water glass, Ray. Her eyes tracked him with the careful, fragile attention of someone who has learned that adults are mostly dangerous but is trying to determine if this particular one might be different. Emily saw it from across the room, and it broke something open in her chest, that quality of tentative, terrified hope on a child's face. The specific look of someone who wants to trust and cannot afford to be wrong. Ray glanced at the girl once, just once. His expression didn't shift dramatically. He was too controlled for that, too practiced, but something in it softened by a degree that Emily caught because she was looking for it. Then he looked back at Canvas Jacket and said something else, and Canvas Jacket's jaw worked silently for a moment before he nodded. Emily set down the cloth. Something had just been agreed to. She didn't know what. She didn't know the terms or the shape of it. But a negotiation had just concluded, and the conclusion had gone to Ray, and she could feel it in the room the way you feel a fever break, a shift in the quality of the air, a loosening. She moved. She didn't go to table 9 directly. She went to the kitchen window first because she needed 30 seconds and a reason to be at the back of the room. "Bobby," she said quietly through the window, "I need you to prop the back door open, the service exit." Bobby turned slowly. "Why, yo?" "Because I'm asking you to." Emily. "Bobby, the back door, open it and stay in the kitchen." He looked at her for a long moment. This woman he had worked beside for 6 years. This woman whose face he had learned to read in the specific way of people who spend years in close proximity to each other. And he must have found what he needed in it because he turned and walked to the back of the kitchen. Emily counted to 20. Then she picked up the coffee pot, always the coffee pot, always the prop that let her move through any part of the room without question. And she walked toward table 9 from the side, coming around the long way, so that her approach ended with her standing beside the booth at the window side beside the girl. "Refill," she asked Ray. "Please," he said, and his eyes briefly went to the girl and back to Emily, and in that exchange, wordless. Half a second, the rest of the plan transferred between them as cleanly as if they'd sat down and written it out. Emily filled Ray's cup. She set the pot down on the edge of the table, and she turned to the girl with the full warmth of every decent human impulse she had. "Hey, honey," she said, "I need you to come with me for just a second. We got something in the back for you, okay? Just 1 second." The girl looked at Canvas Jacket. Emily watched Canvas Jacket. His eyes went to Ray, and Ray was looking at him with an expression that contained multitudes, patience, warning, and something beneath both of those that was not negotiable. Canvas Jacket looked at the table. He said nothing. He said nothing. That was the moment. The nothing. The absence of the command that would have stopped the girl from moving, the silence where the control used to be, the first crack in the structure that had been holding her in place. The girl looked back at Emily. Emily held out her hand, not grabbing, not directing, just open, an option. A door left ajar. The girl slid toward the edge of the seat. Broken Jaw shifted 1 inch. That was all 1 inch of movement, his weight coming forward, and Ray's hand came down on the table with a sound that wasn't loud but was absolutely final. One word followed it. Emily didn't hear the word. She didn't need to. Broken jaw's weight went back. The girl stood up. She was smaller standing than she had seemed in the booth, or maybe Emily had known intellectually that she was small and was only now feeling the reality of her actual dimensions. This child who fit under Emily's arm as Emily put a hand gently on her shoulder and turned her toward the back of the diner. She was maybe 13, barely 13. She smelled like someone else's soap and too many hours in a car, and underneath that, very faintly, something that was just her. Just a kid, just a person, just a girl who deserved to be somewhere else entirely. Right this way, Emily said her voice perfectly. Even the voice she used for customers and for scared people, and for moments that required her to be more than she felt capable of being. They walked toward the back. Emily did not look behind her. She did not check to see what was happening at table 9. She committed completely to the 12 steps between the booth and the kitchen door, because looking back would have been doubt, and doubt would have been visible, and visible doubt was the one thing she couldn't afford in these 12 steps. 11 steps. 10. She heard Ray's voice behind her, still low, still controlled now, with something in it that had not been there before. Not louder, harder. The difference between a closed door and a locked one. 7 steps. She felt the girl's shoulder trembling slightly under her hand, or maybe that was her own hand. She honestly couldn't tell. 5 steps. Almost there, Emily said quietly. You're okay, I've got you. 3 steps. 2, 1. They went through the kitchen door. Bobby was standing at the back exit, the service door propped open with a cinder block, cold Montana air coming through in a thin, sharp stream. He saw Emily and the girl, and his face did something complicated. Recognition, relief, and a kind of controlled fury that he was clearly working hard to keep below the surface. He stepped aside without being asked. Emily guided the girl through the kitchen, past the fryer, past the prep counter, past the industrial sink, where the dishes from the early rush were stacked, and she talked the whole time quietly, steadily, saying nothing in particular and everything at once. We're going right through here. You're fine. I've got you. Nobody's going to you're fine. Right through here. They reached the back door. The cold hit them both. Emily stepped through, first pulling the girl gently with her, and there was an alley and a street lamp and 2 men she'd never seen before in leather jackets who stepped back immediately, giving space because Ray had obviously sent them around before he came inside, had done the geometry of this before he'd even sat down at the counter, had placed his people where they needed to be, because that was what Ray Callahan did. That was the specific quality of mind that 11 years of Friday morning coffees had let Emily witness in small doses. One of the men, older, silver-streaked, beard, steady eyes, held up a hand. You're safe, he said to the girl. Direct, simple. Nobody's going to touch you. The girl stopped walking. Emily felt it happen, the halt, the full stop, the body that had been moving because Emily was moving, suddenly running out of momentum. She looked up at the man with the silver beard, and then she looked at Emily, and her face did something that Emily would carry with her for the rest of her life. It cracked open. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies with tears and sound, just quietly, the specific devastating way that a face that has held itself together through pure necessity lets go when necessity finally lifts. Her chin moved first, then her eyes filled. Is this real? She whispered. Emily put both hands on her shoulders and looked her straight in the eye. Yes, she said. This is real. You're out. The girl made a sound that wasn't quite a word and wasn't quite a cry and was somehow more than either of those things. And Emily pulled her in and held her, this child she had known for less than an hour, this stranger she had watched across a dining room and recognized by the quality of her stillness. And she held her in the cold alley behind the Copper Kettle Diner, while the sound of Ray Callahan's voice, still low, still controlled, still doing whatever it needed to do, drifted faintly through the walls from somewhere inside. She held her, and she said nothing else because there was nothing else needed right now. The man with the silver beard pulled out a phone. I'll call it in, he said to Emily. She nodded. She kept her arms around the girl. Inside the diner, a chair scraped back. Someone raised their voice briefly. Broken jaw, she thought the sound of someone who had just discovered that the leverage they'd been counting on was no longer there, and then went quiet again. The going quiet was the part that mattered. Emily closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them because there was still work to do, because the night wasn't finished, because 3 seconds was all she could afford. But for 3 seconds, she let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. The napkin, the coffee, the 12 steps, the back door, and how close it had been, and how many things had needed to go exactly right, and how most of them had. The girl was shaking against her shoulder. Emily held on tighter. "I've got you," she said again. She meant it in every way a person can mean something. The girl's name was Lily. Emily learned it in the alley in pieces, the way you learn things from someone who has spent a long time not being asked. The man with the silver beard, raised guy, steady and quiet, who had introduced himself only as Colt, had gently asked her name while they waited, and the girl had said it so softly that Colt had leaned in and asked her to repeat it, and she had Lily. Just the one word, but she said it like she was reclaiming it, like she hadn't used it in a while and needed to confirm it still fit. "That's a good name," Colt said. He didn't say anything else about it, which was exactly right. Emily kept one hand on Lily's back. She could feel the girl's breathing still uneven, still catching at the top of each inhale, the breathing of someone whose body hadn't yet received the message that the immediate danger had passed. Emily knew that feeling. She'd had it herself after things that were much smaller than whatever Lily had been through, and she knew that no amount of telling someone they were safe would make their nervous system believe it. The body kept its own timeline. You just had to stay close and wait for it. From inside the diner, voices, muffled through the wall but present. Ray's voice was the constant, low-measured, the steady baseline beneath everything else. Canvas Jacket's voice came in bursts, shorter now than they'd been at the beginning. Each one clipped off faster than the last, like arguments running out of ground to stand on. Lily's head turned toward the sound. "It's okay," Emily said. "He knows what he's doing." Lily looked at her. "Who is he?" Emily thought about how to answer that. "He's someone who doesn't let things go wrong when he can help it," she said. Lily considered this. Then she said very quietly, "They said no one would come." Emily's throat tightened. "Who said that?" "The men." Lily's eyes went to the wall toward the sound of the voices, the one in the canvas jacket. "He said it a lot. He said," she stopped, swallowed, started again. "He said that nobody looks for girls like me." The silence that followed that sentence was the loudest thing Emily had heard all night. "He was wrong," Emily said. And she put everything she had into those 3 words every year of watching people every Friday night, every instinct she'd ever trusted, because she needed Lily to have something real to hold on to. "He was completely wrong. Do you hear me?" Lily looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, small but real. Inside, something changed. Emily heard it before she understood it, a shift in the rhythm of the voices, a new note entering the room. Canvas Jacket's voice rose briefly, a spike of something that might have been desperation dressed up as aggression, and then Ray said something that cut through it like a hand laid flat on a table. Final. Done. And then silence. Not the silence of things settling, the silence of things having been decided. Colt's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, said nothing, put it back in his pocket. He looked at Emily. 2 minutes, he said. She didn't ask what that meant. She understood it meant the inside portion of the night was concluding, and she needed to be ready for whatever the outside portion required. She looked at Lily. "I need to go back in for just a minute," she said. "Colt's going to stay right here with you. He's not going to leave your side, okay?" Lily's hands, small, cold, the nails bitten down to nothing, found Emily's wrist. Not grabbing, just touching. "Don't be long," she said. "I won't be long," Emily promised. She went back through the service door. Usham. The kitchen was exactly as she'd left it, Bobby standing at the pass-through, dish towel still in his hands, the specific posture of a large man trying to contain himself. He looked at Emily when she came through the door and opened his mouth. "She's safe," Emily said before he could ask. "She's outside with Colt." Bobby exhaled. It sounded like a month of held breath. "What's happening in there?" he asked. "I'm going to find out." She pushed through the kitchen door and back onto the floor. The dining room had reorganized itself in her absence. Dale Richter was gone. He'd left cash on his table and departed at some point during the last 15 minutes, which was the smartest thing Dale Richter had ever done. The unknown older customer was also gone. The room was just the booths, the counter, the pie display, the flickering light above the pass-through, and at table 9, Ray, canvas jacket, and broken jaw. Ray was standing now. Canvas jacket and broken jaw were still seated, and the geometry of it, Ray standing, them sitting, was its own complete sentence. Ray looked at Emily when she came through the door. He tilted his head toward the counter, barely a centimeter, and she went there and stayed there. Canvas jacket's face had arrived somewhere Emily had never quite seen on a person before. It wasn't fear exactly, or it was fear mixed with something else, something more complicated. It was the face of a man who had believed genuinely and without question that he was the most dangerous person in any room he entered, and who had just been shown not with violence, not with weapons, but with words and knowledge, and the specific gravity of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he'd done, that he had been wrong about this, that he had always been wrong about this, and that being wrong about this had consequences. "You're going to sit there," Ray said, and his voice was quiet enough that Emily had to focus to catch all of it, "until the people I called arrive, and then you're going to go with them, and you're going to answer every question they ask you, because the alternative—" He paused. He let the pause do work. "You already know what the alternative looks like. I told you." Canvas jacket said nothing. "Nod if you understand me," Ray said. Canvas jacket nodded. Ray looked at broken jaw. Broken jaw nodded without being asked, which told Emily everything about where the power in that booth had relocated itself over the last 30 minutes. Ray walked to the counter. He sat back down on his stool. He picked up his coffee cup. It had gone cold. It had been sitting there since Emily first poured it, and he drank from it anyway, and set it down and looked at Emily. "The girl," he said. "She's out back with Colt," Emily said. "She's okay. She's shaken, but she's okay." Ray nodded once. Something moved through his expression, not relief exactly too controlled for relief, but a release of something that had been held very tight. "Her name is Lily," Emily said. He absorbed this. "How old? 13, I think. Maybe younger." His jaw worked slightly. He set his coffee cup down with a precision that told her he was managing something he wasn't going to show at this particular moment. "Okay," he said. "Ray?" She kept her voice low. "What did you say to him?" He went pale. "I've never seen—" "I told him his name," Ray said simply. "His real name, and his partner's, and the address of the warehouse in Billings where they've been moving kids through for the last 8 months. And I told him that the people who run that warehouse don't know yet that this particular delivery didn't arrive, but they'd figure it out by morning. And that when they did, the question of where his loyalties were going to become very relevant to his continued well-being." He paused. "Men like him aren't brave. They're just positioned. Change their position, the bravery goes away on its own." Emily stared at him. "How do you know all that?" Ray looked at her for a moment. "I've been watching that operation for 11 months, he said. "We've been watching it. This isn't the first girl they have moved through this corridor." The weight of that settled over Emily like cold water. 11 months. Other girls. A corridor. A whole infrastructure of it, and she'd been here, right here, 11 years in this diner on this road, pouring coffee and reading people and not knowing. Then why she started? Because watching and having enough to act are two different things, Ray said, and there was something in his voice that was very old and very tired and had been carried a long way. "Tonight was the first time I had enough to act." Umpweg. The sound of gravel crunching outside reached them at 10:14 p.m. Emily knew it wasn't Ray's people. They were already here. They already stationed their bikes quiet in the lot. This was a different sound, heavier, the specific sound of a vehicle with authority moving without urgency. 2 sheriff's department vehicles. She saw the lights through the window, not flashing, just headlights, which told her Ray had called someone he trusted, and that person had understood that this particular situation required discretion over theater. Ray stood up again. He straightened his jacket. He looked at canvas jacket one more time. "Remember what I said," he told him. "All of it." Canvas jacket looked at the table. The door opened and 2 deputies came in. Both of them reading the room immediately, both of them going straight to table 9, the way people go somewhere when they've been told exactly where to go. The taller one had a face Emily recognized vaguely, maybe from a county fair, maybe from a gas station. He looked at Ray. "The girl, back alley," Ray said. "Colt's with her. She's okay. She's not injured as far as we know, but she'll need a full assessment. Her name is Lily. That's all we have." The deputy nodded and turned to his partner. "Go around." The partner went back out the front door, heading around the building. The taller deputy turned to table 9 and put his hand on the back of Canvas Jacket's chair. "Sir, I need you to stand up, please." Canvas Jacket stood, slowly, with the movements of someone whose decisions have run out. Broken Jaw stood without being asked. Neither of them said a word. Emily watched them be walked out of the Copper Kettle Diner, and she felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, not relief, not even exhaustion, though all of those were present underneath. What she felt primarily and most acutely was the specific grief of something that had almost been a different story. She felt the weight of how many minutes it had taken, how many small things had needed to go exactly right, and how casually the whole thing could have gone another way. The door closed behind the deputies. The diner was quiet. Bobby came through the kitchen door. He looked at the empty table 9. He looked at Emily. He looked at Ray. He said, "Somebody going to tell me what just happened?" "A girl needed help," Emily said. "We helped her." Bobby looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Ray. "You want fresh coffee?" he asked. Ray looked down at his cold cup. "Yeah," he said. "That'd be good." Bobby went back to the kitchen. The sound of the coffee pot, the familiar hiss of it, filled the room and was the most ordinary and necessary sound Emily had ever heard. She went outside through the front door. She needed the air. She needed 30 seconds of cold Montana night against her face because the inside of her chest was doing something she didn't have a name for, and the cold usually helped with things she didn't have names for. She stood on the front step and she breathed. The parking lot had changed. Ray's people were still there. She could see them, several of them, positioned at various points with the casual alertness of people accustomed to being positioned. The sheriff's vehicles were parked at angles near the side of the building. One of the deputies was on his radio. From somewhere around back, she could hear a voice. A woman's voice, she realized, which meant they'd called someone specifically for Lily, someone who understood what came after, which told her that Ray's phone call had been more detailed and more prepared than a simple heads up. Someone had been waiting for this call. That thought landed in Emily strangely. Someone had been waiting, which meant Ray had known tonight might be the night, which meant he'd come to the Copper Kettle tonight, not entirely without reason. And the napkin hadn't been the only thing that had mattered, and she was going to need to sit with that later when she had time to sit with things. She heard the front door open behind her. She didn't turn around. Ray came and stood beside her. They were quiet for the moment. The cold was sharp, and the sky above was doing what Montana skies did, being enormous and indifferent and full of more stars than made sense. "Did you know?" she asked. She meant, did you know it would be tonight? Did you know when you rode down here? Did the napkin confirm something you already suspected, or did it tell you something new? "I knew the route," he said. "I didn't know the night." He paused. "When Colt flagged me this afternoon, I thought maybe. Then I rode by and saw their plates in your lot. You drove by before you came in." "Once," he said. "Just past." Emily thought about that. Ray riding past in the dark, clocking the plates, making his calculation, calling it in to whoever was on the receiving end of the phone call that had put a woman with the right training in the alley within 20 minutes of Lily walking out the back door. All of it moving simultaneously, all of it converging on this parking lot, this diner, this night. "How many times has this road been used?" she asked, "for moving them through?" Ray was quiet for a moment. "More than we want to count." "And the girls before Lily?" "Some of them we found," he said. "In time." He stopped. The pause held something heavy, something with real mass. "Some of them we didn't." Emily closed her eyes briefly. She thought about the weight Ray Callahan had been carrying around this particular stretch of Montana highway for 11 months, and she thought about how he'd sat across from Canvas Jacket and delivered names and addresses with the flat calm of someone who had done this in his head 1,000 times. And she understood now fully that tonight had not been impulsive. Tonight had been the product of nearly a year of watching and waiting and building toward the moment when there was enough, when moving was better than waiting, when the cost of another night's patience was higher than the cost of acting. "There was a girl," Ray said, not looking at her, looking at the sky. "Before I started watching this route, before I knew about the operation, her name was Angela." Emily waited. "She was 14, he said. "She came through this corridor and we didn't know about it. Nobody was watching. She wasn't found in time." He stopped. The stopping said everything the words had left out. "Angela," Emily said. "Yeah." The name sat between them in the cold, small and permanent. "So tonight," Emily started. Tonight isn't revenge, Ray said, and his voice was the most stripped down she had ever heard it. No performance in it, no management, just the plain thing underneath. It's not justice either. The system handles justice now, whatever that means. He finally looked at her. Tonight is just, it's one girl who got out. One night that went the right way. That's all it is. Emily looked at him. This man with his worn leather jacket and his black coffee and his 11 months of watching a highway and his one girl named Angela, who he hadn't been able to pull back from whatever she'd fallen into. This man who had built a napkin code with a waitress 4 years ago because he'd seen a situation escalating at a booth and thought she should have a way to signal. He had thought ahead by 4 years. He had been thinking ahead this whole time. You saved her life tonight, Emily said. Lily, you saved her life. Ray shook his head slightly. You saved her life, he said. I just showed up. You showed up because of a napkin. I showed up, he said, because of 11 years of you reading people right. The napkin was just the final word of a sentence you'd been building for a long time. Emily didn't know what to do with that. She tucked it somewhere deep and quiet, somewhere she'd return to later. From around the back of the building, the door opened, and voices moved. The woman's voice. Lily's voice, brief and fragile, asking something. Then the deputy's voice answering. Then the sound of a vehicle door. Emily moved without thinking, following the sound around the side of the building, needing to see. Ray followed. Lily was at the open door of one of the sheriff's vehicles, standing with a woman Emily didn't know. Mid-40s, calm-faced, the specific composure of someone trained to be the first steady thing a traumatized child encounters. Lily had a silver emergency blanket around her shoulders, and she looked smaller than ever inside it. And she was talking, actually talking in full sentences to the woman, which told Emily that something had unlocked in her in the last 20 minutes. Not healed, not resolved, but unlocked. Lily saw Emily coming around the corner and stopped mid-sentence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Lily took 3 steps and put her arms around Emily's waist and held on with the specific, desperate strength of someone who has found the first solid thing in a very long time and does not intend to let go until they absolutely have to. Emily held her back, both arms completely. You came back, Lily said into her shoulder. I said I wouldn't be long, Emily said. Lily laughed. It was a small, broken, completely real laugh, the kind that surprises you, the kind that comes up from somewhere you forgot was still there. And Emily felt it against her shoulder and thought that she would trade 11 years of Friday nights for this exact sound, this one laugh from this one girl. The woman with the calm face gave them a moment. She was good at her job. Then gently, Lily, we need to get moving, okay? Lily pulled back. She looked at Emily. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying anymore. She'd moved past that into something quieter and more interior. She looked at Emily the way people look at someone they want to remember. What's your name? She asked. Your full name. Emily Carter. Lily repeated it quietly to herself, filed it away somewhere. Then she looked past Emily at Ray, who had come to stand a few feet back, hands in his pockets, deliberately peripheral, giving them the space. She looked at him for a moment. Thank you, she said, directly, clearly, with the weight of someone who understood what they were thanking him for. Ray nodded once. He didn't say you were welcome. He didn't say it was nothing. He just nodded, and it was the right response, and Lily seemed to understand that too. She got into the vehicle. The door closed. Emily stood and watched the taillights move out of the parking lot and onto Route 9 and grow smaller and disappear. And she stood there until they were completely gone, and then she stood there a moment longer. Ray came up beside her. Neither of them spoke. The cold pressed in from everywhere, and the stars continued being enormous and indifferent overhead, and somewhere inside the copper kettle, Bobby was pouring fresh coffee into a cup that had gone cold, because that was what you did. You kept going. You kept the ordinary things running. You made the next cup, even when the one before had sat too long. Emily took a breath. I should go back in, she said. Yeah, Ray said. Neither of them moved for another moment. Then Emily turned and walked back toward the diner, and the bell above the door rang for the last time that night, and the sound of it was the most normal thing she had ever heard. Bobby had made fresh coffee. He'd also made a grilled cheese that nobody ordered, which he set on the counter without comment when Emily came back through the door, and the sight of its simple golden cut diagonally the way Emily always cut them for the late-night regulars made her throat close for a half second before she got it back under control. "Eat," Bobby said. "You've been on your feet since 4. "I'm fine." Emily. She sat on the stool. She picked up half the sandwich. She ate it because Bobby needed her to eat it, and because he was right, and because sometimes the most important thing you can do after something enormous is let someone hand you something ordinary and accept it without argument. Ray came in behind her. He settled back onto a stool 2 seats down, the same stool he'd been sitting on when Canvas Jacket was still in this building, when the girl was still at table 9, when everything was still compressed into that terrible potential. He looked at the counter. Bobby, without being asked, poured him a fresh cup and set it down and went back to the kitchen without a word. 3 people who understood each other well enough to not need the ceremony. The diner was completely empty except for the 2 of them. The clock read 10:47 p.m. Outside Ray's, people were still in the lot. She could feel their presence the way you feel a wall, even when you're not looking at it, and that presence, which had felt like rescue an hour ago, now felt like the slow exhale of a night that had spent all its tension and was settling into something quieter. Emily ate the other half of the sandwich. Ray drank his coffee. For a while, neither of them said anything at all, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had just been through the same thing from different angles and were each separately processing the weight of it. Emily had been in silences with Ray before Thursday mornings when the diner was slow and he was on his second cup and there was nothing that needed saying, but this one had a different texture. Heavier, more layered, like fabric with something sewn into the lining. "The operation," Emily said finally. "The warehouse in Billings. What happens to it now?" Ray turned his cup slowly on the counter. "That information went to the right people 2 hours ago, before I came in tonight." He paused. "By morning, it won't be operational." Emily looked at him. "You were already moving on it." "The 2 in the booth were the last piece I needed in the right place," he said. "Custody on record with a witness chain. It closes the loop." Emily sat with Ben. The full architecture of it assembled itself in her mind. 11 months of watching Ray building towards something she'd had no idea was happening. The napkin arriving at the exact moment 2 parts of a much larger operation converged at her counter. Her role in it, she understood now, had been both smaller and larger than she'd known in the moment. Smaller because the larger machinery had already been moving. Larger because without tonight, without Lily being pulled from that booth, the loop didn't close. The warehouse in Billings kept operating. Other girls kept moving through. "Lily was the piece that mattered," Emily said. "Lily was the piece that made everything else actionable," Ray said. "Yeah." The word actionable should have felt cold, clinical, like something from a report. But the way Ray said it with that specific tiredness underneath made it feel like the opposite. It felt like the word a person uses when they've been waiting a very long time to be allowed to move. "Soik." She refilled his coffee without asking. He let her, which was its own form of communication. "Tell me about Angela," Emily said. She half expected him to redirect, to give her the version he'd given outside the short version, the factual version, the one that named the grief without letting it breathe. Instead, he was quiet for a moment, both hands around the mug, and then he started talking. "Angela Reyes," he said, "I'm 14 years old. She was from a town 60 miles south of here. Tiny place, the kind where everybody knows everybody, which sounds like safety, until you realize it also means everybody knows exactly which kids don't have anyone watching out for them." He stopped. She didn't have anyone watching out for her. Her mother was gone, her father worked 3 towns over, and she walked into the wrong situation with the wrong people on a Tuesday night in March. He turned the mug again. "We found out about it 3 weeks later. Too late to be useful. Too late to be anything." Emily didn't say she was sorry. It seemed insufficient, and Ray wasn't telling her this to be consoled. He was telling her because she'd asked, and because some things need to be spoken out loud to remain real, to remain owned, rather than drifting into the place where you stop being able to look at them directly. After Angela, he said, "I started paying attention to this corridor, really paying attention, and the more I looked, the first I understood that this wasn't random, it was a route, established, used regularly, which meant someone knew the geography, knew the timing of law enforcement response in this county, knew which roads and which stops were safe to use." He looked at Emily then, and she saw something in his face she'd only glimpsed before in all the years of Thursday mornings. Not anger, not grief, but the specific expression of someone who has made a decision they intend to honor for the rest of their life. They knew the copper kettle was on a quiet stretch, 40 minutes from a police response. Easy stop, low scrutiny. Emily felt that land, low scrutiny, her diner, her counter, her years of Friday nights. The road she'd built her professional life on had been on someone's map as a safe place to stop with children they were moving against their will. "You never told me," she said. "No," he said, "I didn't." He held her look. "Because I didn't know when or if they'd use it, and I didn't want you spending every shift watching for something that might not come for months, or might come on your night off, or might use a different stop entirely." He paused. "And because if you'd known, you might have looked for it, and if they'd seen you looking—" "I know," she said. "I understand." She did. She understood the calculation completely, and she couldn't argue with it, and she also felt a flicker of something. Not anger exactly, but a close neighbor to it at having been protected from information in her own diner on her own road. She filed that feeling away. It was legitimate, and it was hers, but tonight was not the night for it. "The napkin," she said instead. "When you built the system with me 4 years ago, were you already watching the corridor?" Ray was quiet for a moment. 8 months in, he said. She absorbed this. "So the napkin was part of it," he said. "Yeah, I needed something that would work fast if it ever came to this. And you were already—" He stopped, started again. "You already read people better than anyone I've ever known. I just wanted to make sure that if you ever read something you couldn't handle alone, you had a way to reach me that nobody in a booth would notice." Emily looked at her coffee cup. She thought about 4 years of folding napkins behind the counter, fingers finding the triangle and the tuck without meaning to, rehearsing something she thought she was just maintaining out of habit. She thought about the 43 rings of the bell on a normal Friday and the 44th ring tonight, and the way she'd looked up and seen 2 men and a girl and felt the thing in her chest that she'd been trained by, 11 years in a napkin code, and one man's quiet foresight to recognize. "You planned for tonight before tonight existed," she said. "I planned for the possibility," he said. "There's a difference." "Not much of one," she said. He almost smiled. It was the closest she'd seen him come to it all evening. "No," he said. "Not much of one." "Mama." Her phone buzzed at 11:23 p.m. She'd had it on the counter since getting back inside the single bar of service flickering in and out, and she'd been watching it the way you watch something you're hoping to hear from, but have been trying not to need. The buzz made her hand move before her brain told it to. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. Area code local. The message was 4 words. "She's asking for you." Emily stared at it. Ray was watching her face. "What is it?" She turned the phone so he could see. He read it. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise, but a kind of recognition. The look of a man who has seen many things but still finds certain ones meaningful. "The advocate," he said. "The woman in the alley, she must have gotten your number from Colt." Emily was already typing back. "Where?" The reply came in under a minute. A location, not the sheriff's station, which told her that whoever was handling Lily's case understood that a 13-year-old who had been through what Lily had been through did not need to spend her first hours of freedom in a government building if it could be helped. A address she recognized. The community center on Birch, which the county used for crisis situations, 40 minutes north. She looked at Ray. "I need to go." "I know," he said. "Can you—" She gestured at the diner, at the empty tables, at the pie display and the counter and all of it. "Bobby's here," he said. "Go." She was already reaching for her coat. On them. She drove the 40 minutes faster than she should have and slower than she wanted to. The road was dark and straight and empty in the specific way of rural Montana after 11 at night, and she drove it with both hands on the wheel and her mind doing something she couldn't quite categorize, not thinking, not feeling, just moving through the residue of the night, all its accumulated weight shifting and resettling with every mile. She thought about what Ray had said. One girl who got out, one night that went the right way. She thought about Angela Reyes, 14 years old, a town 60 miles south, a Tuesday night in March found too late. She thought about the word correction. Not revenge, not justice. Correction. The way you correct a sentence that went wrong, not by erasing what was written, because you can't erase it, but by writing the next sentence better. She pulled into the community center lot at 12:09 a.m.
Was dinner there?
Lily was in a small room with a calm-faced woman whose name turned out to be Sandra and a younger female deputy who was sitting in the corner doing paperwork and managing to make herself almost invisible in the way of someone who'd learned that sometimes the best support is a body in the room that isn't making demands. Lily looked up when Emily came through the door. She had been given clean clothes, a sweatshirt, sweatpants, both too large, both belonging to the community center's emergency supply bin, which meant they were generic and soft and not anyone's in particular, but they were clean. Her hair had been combed and sat loose around her shoulders. She had been given food. There was an empty plate on the table beside her, and the sight of the empty plate hit Emily harder than she'd expected because the last time she'd seen Lily near food, it was a full glass of water she hadn't touched and a menu that was never put in front of her. She had eaten, something that had been clenched in Emily's chest since 8:47 p.m., loosened by 1 full degree. "Hey," Emily said. "Hey," Lily said. Emily sat down across from her. Sandra moved to the edge of the room, giving them space, staying present, doing her job in the quiet way of someone who understood that her job right now was to be a wall that kept the rest of the world out. "How are you doing?" Emily asked. Lily considered the question with the seriousness it deserved rather than deflecting it the way people usually did. "I don't know yet," she said. "Sandra says that's okay, that not knowing yet is normal." "Sandra's right," Emily said. "She says it a lot, actually." The ghost of something moved across Lily's face, not quite amusement, but its precursor. The first sign that somewhere, underneath everything, there was still a 13-year-old girl with a sense of humor intact. Emily clocked it like a vital sign. Good. That was good. "How long?" Emily asked. She kept her voice even. "How long were you with them?" Lily's eyes went to the table briefly. 19 days, she said. 19 days. Emily held that number in her head without flinching, because flinching was for later when she was alone in her car, or in her kitchen, or somewhere that her reaction didn't have to be managed. "Are you from Montana?" she asked. "Idaho," Lily said. "Boise." She paused. "They're calling my dad tonight. Sandra said She stopped. Her jaw worked. "Sandra said he's been looking for me since the second day." Emily felt the sentence move through her. Since the second day. A father who'd noticed on day 1 filed the report on day 2 and had been living in the specific purgatory of a missing child for 17 days since. "He's going to be so relieved to hear your voice," Emily said. Lily nodded. Her eyes had gone bright. She was keeping it together with the same discipline she'd maintained in the diner control precise, but the control was thinner now, more translucent, and underneath it, Emily could see all the things that were going to need time and space and the right kind of help. "Emily," Lily said, her voice dropped. "In the diner, when you said—" She stopped. "Tried again. When you said you saw me, I need you to know that—" She stopped again, and her composure made a small, visible crack before she sealed it. "I had stopped believing that was going to happen, that someone was going to see me." The room was very quiet. Emily leaned forward. She put her hand on the table, not grabbing, not directing, just placing it there available. The same gesture she'd made in the booth. The open door. "Lily," she said, "you were always worth seeing. The fact that it took until tonight for the right person to be in the right place, that's not a reflection of your worth. That's just—" She searched for the word. "That's just timing, and timing is cruel sometimes. But tonight it wasn't. Tonight it worked." Lily looked at her hand on the table. Then she put her own hand over it, just rested it there light as a leaf. They sat like that for a moment. Then Lily said very quietly, "I'm going to remember your eyes." Emily's throat closed completely. She breathed through it. "And I'm going to remember yours," she said. She drove back to Hargrove at 1:30 a.m. She didn't go home. She went back to the Copper Kettle because the Copper Kettle was where the night had started, and some part of her needed to close the loop in the same place it had opened. The diner was dark. Bobby had closed up, which she'd expected, but she had her key, and she let herself in and stood in the quiet of the empty dining room for a long moment. Table 9 was just a table. Booth laminate surface, the chrome napkin dispenser, the salt and pepper. That never quite sat level. In 3 hours, it would have a family at it, or a trucker, or someone passing through on the way somewhere else, and they would eat their eggs and drink their coffee and not know that tonight in this booth, a piece of something enormous had turned. She walked to the counter. She stood at the spot where the napkin dispenser was, and she pulled out a single napkin, and without thinking about it, her fingers moved into the fold triangle, corner tucked, and she held it there for a moment. 4 years of building something she hoped never to need. One night of needing it, one girl named Lily going home to a father in Boise who had never stopped looking. She unfolded the napkin, smoothed it flat on the counter, left it there white and ordinary and clean. She thought about Ray Callahan, who was riding back north right now. Probably 40 minutes of dark road between tonight and whatever tomorrow brought another stretch of watching, another 11 months of paying attention to a quarter, another calculation about when watching became acting. She thought about what he'd said outside under the Montana sky. One girl who got out. One night that went the right way. She thought about Angela Reyes and the weight Ray had been carrying since March and how tonight hadn't lifted that weight. Nothing would lift it, but had set something beside it. A different thing, a thing that was still becoming. She thought about Lily saying, "I'm going to remember your eyes." She had kept a drawer in the back office for 11 years. Mostly it held spare pens, a bus schedule that was 3 years out of date, a photograph from the diner's anniversary party, a thank you note from a regular who'd moved to Arizona. The small accumulations of a life spent in one place. She went to the back office. She found an index card and a pen. She wrote Lily. 19 days. She got home. She put it in the drawer. She looked at it for a moment. Then she closed the drawer, turned off the office light, and walked back through her diner, past the booths, past the counter, past the pie display, and the coffee station and the kitchen pass-through, where Bobby had left the light on, as he always did, so she wouldn't come back to complete darkness. She stopped at the door. She looked back at the empty room, at table 9, at the corner of the counter where a folded napkin had waited for the right pair of hands, and found them. Some acts of courage are not loud. They don't announce themselves in advance or ask for recognition after. They live in the small, precise decisions made in the space between what is easy and what is necessary. A fold of paper, a cup of coffee kept hot, 2 words spoken quietly across a dining room to a girl who had stopped believing anyone would say them. Emily Carter turned off the last light. She walked out into the cold Montana night, and behind her the Copper Kettle Diner sat quiet on Route 9, ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of place you pass without slowing down, holding in its walls and its booths and its worn linoleum floor, the memory of a Friday night when ordinary was the most powerful thing in the room.